welcome to the Generalist, where security practitioners come to look beyond niches, silos, egos, and to expand their professional comfort zones. My name is Ilya Umanskiy. This is episode 3, where we're going to talk about our obsession with tech. As I said in my intro video, I don't mean to belittle the importance and usefulness of technology. My argument is that we are racing toward the world in which technology overwhelms our ability to make rational choices and decisions. And so the same exists, in my view, in our industry, in security, or as I call it, asset protection. And what I want to share with you is some food for thought about where we are, what challenges we're facing on the tech side, and how to do better. There's always an underlying theme in every episode I create about improvement, about continual learning. And this is what I want to share with you in this episode. So, in my opinion, and perhaps some of you will agree, the technology sector that serves the industry that we all call security and asset protection is becoming more and more fragmented. What we notice is a few examples of these systems being all over the place is let's say, in the last decade, we've moved on from recognizing things like access control, intrusion detection, video surveillance, or signal intelligence, if you will, as being the staples of the industry, and a lot of organizations have been making investments into those technologies. What has become evident is that there also have been number of failures with these technologies being deployed. Just look up the word nuisance alarm. And so we look today at this collection of ever expanding and ever narrower technologies that work on weapons detection, that today in the times of COVID look at fever detection, that offer facial recognition, that help with emergency communications, that also help with nuisance alarm reduction. And there is this additional plethora of solutions, technologies, that I would call collectively a cyber soup. No wonder that we are now struggling to understand, okay, so which solution is better? How do we choose it? How do we integrate it into our organization? How do we sell it to the decision makers? Because such solutions, however fragmented or perhaps less expensive they may appear, they actually require a lot of effort to run. They require narrow education for those who operate it. They require individual maintenance, individual interaction with the manufacturer, or at least an integrator. And all of that is resting on the shoulders of people in our industry who are far more pressured today than they have been, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, to deliver results that help organizations be resilient. So I think that with such fragmentation, we can turn our attention to technologies that are around us and take a few examples. And one thing stands out more than anything else in my view. So if we look at the market of access control, if we look at, let's say, the market of video surveillance, taking two of those just as staples of our industry. You don't have to go far, but just to observe the user interfaces to see that the actual focus on user experience is missing, or it is lacking. Why do I say this? If those systems are supposed to guide a user toward a decision, and then that user perhaps toward an interaction with a team of colleagues to resolve, let's say, a certain issue coming from the signal from those systems. How do you think this works if the font sizes, the screen resolutions, the layout of the user interface, the cluttering of signal information through the user interface is actually presented in a way that actually precludes the user from understanding what is going on? And as much as we tried to integrate policies and procedures into software, into technology, and then serve as useful guides, time-saving guides for users, it is not apparent that these integrations have been successful, because teams that operate these technologies still struggle to understand what signal they're looking at, and then make sense of that signal, and then be guided toward the necessary decision. Now, I can stop, and a lot of people will argue and say, well, wait a second. We have these huge organizations like Apple, like Microsoft, and so on, talking about their SOCs, or security operations centers, and robust teams of operators that are very well trained and so on. And we hear that in conferences, and we hear that in events where folks from those organizations, like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on, Google, come to share their expertise. Well, I say to that we can count the number of such organizations with such level of capability, probably on one hand. So where does it leave the rest of us? Where does it leave a hospital that has several security officers scattered around the property, that has probably outsourced that function to a guarding company, that can barely find space, a sufficient space, I might add, for building out a security operations center, for that doesn't really have capability to make prudent choices about selection of such systems. And a hospital is considered still to be a fairly large entity with possibly good resources. And then where does that leave a manufacturing facility that is primarily focused on getting the product out, okay, making stuff and shipping it out, so its objectives are, making money and making sure things move, rather than thinking about, okay, so how do we hire competent talent to look after our facility? The same goes for data centers, the same goes for organizations that unfortunately don't have the same multi-million-dollar investments into training up the users to use fairly antiquated technologies with fairly basic or actually unhelpful user experience to achieve positive outcomes for the organization and for protection of assets. And so user experience comes as the key point here. I've yet to find a system, and I've piloted and reviewed and operated multiple access control, video surveillance, intrusion detection systems that on the surface appear to be very useful. When you start actually diving into its daily use, call it daily driving, if you will, and then you start thinking about the average user, you quickly understand that the manufacturer never invested in the time of training, that the integrator wants that training to be even shorter because they run on thin profit margins. That the technology itself has been poorly thought out on behalf of the user by somebody who sits in a development team within the manufacturer's organization, and has never really looked at how users need to operate those systems, has never talked to folks who run these systems on a daily basis. I don't want to name names, but one of the systems where I did an analysis of its performance, particularly from a user experience perspective, and it came out to be fairly poor, and I challenged them on this. What happened was not so much that they didn't take the time to speak with me and ask questions and so on, but they couldn't understand why somebody would reach out to them to tell them that there's something incorrect, something is missing from the user experience perspective. And that's what puzzled me quite a bit. This is a team that is supposed to be on the front end of the company, listening to users every day and understanding their challenges and trying to fix the system to perform as well as it can. And I found that that same group of people couldn't care less. Now, it's not an accusation for the rest of the industry. I am pretty sure that there are developers that write software that sit within larger manufacturers of security technologies that actually care and that could spend the time, or maybe do spend the time, trying to understand how users use their products. But I see that happening at a slow pace, or a slower pace than where the rest of the industry is headed and how quickly things are developing. People are slapping together solutions for COVID or for emergency communications or for video surveillance at an alarming pace, only to leave the community of users in the dust in terms of their education, in terms of their capability to make the most optimal use of the products. So a couple of things on the user experience side, I feel, should be mentioned. And this is something that, let's call it a three-rule a position that I take with every product developer. There has to be thoughtful consideration for situation-based user interface. Why situation-based? Well, anything that brings me a signal requires my decision-making and output. Therefore, it has to be shaped and decluttered in such a way that I can make my decisions first, very quickly, and second, accurately. So there has to be that assistive component to a system. Second is a three-step navigation rule. If I cannot complete a task within a product within 3 steps, then it becomes more difficult. And if I'm pressed for time, or if I'm stressed out during a, let's say, emergency situation, how do you think that will go? Intuitive navigation, as a third point here, it really sets up the whole spirit of with which technology needs to be presented to the users. You know, you all use smartphones, and when you take it out of the box, you probably will be a fairly competent user of that smartphone because of the way the user interface is laid out. You can see and interact with that device right away out of the box without needing too much guidance. Now take a step back and think about, would a user who is presented with an access control system interface, would they be able to operate it? Or let's say on the cyber side, CM. Would a user who has no experience using that product be able to use it competently? Why not? So those 3 points I want to present to you for consideration. And so this leaves us with this challenge that We are bombarded with so much technology that comes our way that it's becoming a lot more difficult to make prudent choices and actually develop decision-making processes about selection of technology that is actually useful for us, that actually can enable our enterprises or enable our smaller organizations, and most importantly, enable decision-making. And so we still struggle with answering who should be making decisions about buying security technology, how those decisions need to be made, and what is the justification. So, how do we do better? I think we need to take a step back, and as the industry is pivoting toward this greater perspective of risk management, we really need to look at what's called risk management 2.0. And this term has been coined by a few practitioners, but I primarily have heard it from Alex Sidorenko and his organization that's called Risk Academy. I welcome for you to study this and take a look at what opinions are expressed on the website of that organization and by Alex himself. Why do I feel that it's important? It's because risk management had traditionally existed as a function within an organization, and then it needed to interact with other functions to use certain standards like ISO 31000 and so on to decide on behalf of the organization how to manage risks. Risk Management 2.0 eliminates that completely. It actually says that risk management and risk-conscious decision-making needs to be infused in every decision that an organization makes without a central decision-making czar. So any function, any team should be consistently thinking about risks on a wide spectrum and making choices and decisions on behalf of the organization at their level, knowing what those risks could be, what the vulnerabilities could be, and so on. And the role of the risk manager is to actually help people with decision making. The same can be applied to the area of security as it exists in organizations. I'm not going to go into how to manage risks, but the reason why I'm connecting risk management with technology is because it's very important to take a risk management approach to technology and technology selection and technology implementation. So why? Because at the heart, risk management helps or should help organizations align their let's say, protection strategies, asset protection strategies, with what mission critical assets are known and how they're managed, what risk probability exists or what vulnerabilities are out there relative to risks and threats, and how all of that aligns with business objectives. So if I had to take a step back and say, I'm selecting an access control system, okay, what are the business objectives of the organization? And my selection process, therefore, is easier to align with mission critical assets that the organization has, its business objectives, and I can try to fit the access control component for the organization relative to protection of mission critical assets with better ease, and therefore develop a set of most necessary features and functions within that product. And then also decide how I'm going to enable the users of that system, that product, to make decisions about protection of assets once this product is deployed, on the basis of what signal that product is producing. So Technology today, first and foremost, needs to help solve business problems. And yes, it's an understood statement. But if we look at security technology, does it really help solve business problems? What I can tell you that we are beholden to manufacturers who don't carefully think about user experience or don't have people who understand what user experience is altogether. We are beholden to integrators that must meet profit margins and therefore try to reduce the time invested in educating users so that they can become competent in using equipment. There is a race to develop more and more fragmented products, as I mentioned before, where we have things that are so fragmented that they sometimes are not even integrated with larger platforms, and therefore require specialized training, specialized knowledge, specialized maintenance, where users are left holding this bag of different products and they don't understand how to make sense of how those products actually align with business objectives and the need for risk management. And our objective of supporting the enterprise is lost. So let's consider an example. Let's take a research and development facility and let's assume that it produces formulae for the agricultural sector, and that those formulae are then turned into a physical product. We have a few assets that we have to look after. They're mission critical. We have people, we have the formula and information in which it's stored, then we have computing systems that help with communication and research, and we have a few other support assets without which this facility would not be able to operate, such as infrastructure and what have you. So we have the building, we have, as I said, people, technologies, we have the work product itself. We need to deploy systems for that facility, and then we need to ask a question. Who will make decisions about deployment? How will these products be chosen? And if we have a spectrum of these mission critical assets, some of them are on the physical side and some of them are on the digital side, would we be making choices about security technologies uniformly, or will we be using two functions within an organization to make choices about products, security products, right? So right off the bat, you have an issue. You have an issue that in most organizations, even though you can see a pattern and alignment of assets in order to enable business objectives, you have an issue of typically having two teams that will be responsible for product selection and product deployment and its final integration and how it will operate. So immediately there potentially is a disconnect. Then you have, as I mentioned to you before, issues related that each product actually needs to be scrutinized in order to understand how it caters to user experience. So right now, I suggest to you that we're still talking about probably 7 to 10 products that will be somewhat fragmented, that will have to be purchased from individual different manufacturers, that then will have to be investigated in terms of their integration. And we're still not even close to having chosen and designed a platform that can protect assets across the spectrum of physical and cyber. We'll likely, if we are not smart about it, we'll end up with products that are inferior from a user experience perspective, can possibly be integrated within its own niche, such as physical or cyber, and at the end of the day, will still not achieve transparent and cohesive signal delivery in order to enable decision making for protection of assets. So a second layer to this will be, how do you maintain those products? How do you troubleshoot? And how do you teach operators to use those products? All of which, right now in our industry, is a concern because we don't invest enough time in education. We don't invest enough time in user experience or building a product that can be used competently with all its features. And we still don't integrate cyber tools with security tools competently. So I would suggest that the ideal situation for protection of this facility would actually be a more unified set of products, probably 4 or 5 tops, which could be integrated across the board in order to produce a signal that is guided and then is delivered in such a way on the user interface that actually tells the operator what asset is affected, what is the criticality of that asset, and to then deploy policy advice or procedural advice for each operator to understand what tasks, what actions they need to perform from the moment that they receive a signal. Now, I know some tools on the physical side and I know some tools on the cyber side do that, but not to the level that users have become comfortable with, or at least from the history that I've been observing these technologies, I haven't seen a product that actually does that with great user experience in mind. So the biggest challenge will be to reduce the number of products, to integrate them across the board, regardless of whether it's a physical security product or if it's a cybersecurity product, and enable users to actually be able to see signals and act on signals without delay, so that they would know what attack is happening or what compromise may happen, and direct attention, not only of their own, but also of those that they are reporting to reduce the likelihood or eliminate the likelihood of a negative outcome. And right now, technologies that we have in place are only becoming more fragmented, as I said. So to achieve such an integration, we really need to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we really doing risk management 2.0? Are we really thinking across the spectrum of how the organization is aligning, is deciding on its business objectives, how we as security practitioners are aligning with those business objectives, what kinds of risks are we looking at, and are they are stuck in our individual niches, being physical versus cyber, and why are we selecting technologies from each of the niches rather than taking technologies and saying, no, we need them to be fully integrated so that we can have full signal visibility and therefore act on those signals. Last but not least here is the presentation of information on graphical user interfaces so that users are not stressed by the incoming signal without assistance, without ease of decision making. And this is where I think collectively, regardless of whether we belong to a physical security niche or a cybersecurity niche, we need to start paying closer attention. Well, I leave you with these thoughts. Thank you so much for your attention. Be well.